Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little bit different.
We are, yeah.
Usually we look at a specific technology, maybe a philosophy or a recent trend. But today we are looking at what I can only describe as a national trauma.
That is not an overstatement at all.
We are unpacking the story of Sabena. And on the surface, sure, it's a story about an airline. It's about planes, routes, jet engines.
Right.
But when you actually peel back the layers of the research you've brought today, this isn't really about aviation, is it? It's about colonial ambition. It's about the brutal reality of geopolitics.
And it's about one of the most spectacular corporate suicides in European history.
It really is the rise and fall of a country's ego, in a way.
It is. You have this entity that operated for 78 years. It was a symbol of Belgium.
The flag carrier.
Absolutely. It linked the tiny motherland to this massive colony in Africa. It survived World War II. It flew the first jets across the Atlantic. And then in 2001, it didn't just go bankrupt. It imploded.
And I think for a lot of people, especially if you aren't Belgian, Sabena is just a name from the past, a logo you might remember seeing in an old movie or something.
Or a bit of retro nostalgia.
Exactly. But the scale of this collapse, it shook the aviation world.
It left thousands jobless and essentially erased a national icon overnight. But to understand why the crash was so loud, we have to understand just how high they climbed.
Well, let's start with the name itself, because Sabena sounds pleasant enough. It's got a nice ring to it.
It does.
But I was looking at the notes, and it's an acronym, and not a cute, marketing-friendly acronym either.
No, it is extremely bureaucratic. It stands for Société Anonyme Belge d'Exploitation de la Navigation Aérienne,
Which translates to?
the Belgian Corporation for the Exploitation of Aerial Navigation.
Exploitation of aerial navigation.
Yeah.
It sounds like something a villain in a steampunk novel would run.
It's very 1923, isn't it? It reflects the mindset of the time. I mean, the air wasn't just a place to travel through. It was a resource to be mastered, to be exploited. It was industrial. And you have to remember, in 1923, aviation was barely 20 years old. The Wright brothers were still alive.
So paint the picture for us.
Right.
1923 Belgium. Why does a country the size of a postage stamp, and no offense to Belgium, but you can drive across it in a couple of hours, why do they need a corporation for the exploitation of aerial navigation?
That is the million-dollar question. I mean, if you look at a map of Europe, a domestic airline for Belgium makes zero sense.
You just take a train.
You take a train. But Sabena wasn't created to fly Belgians from Brussels to Antwerp. It was created because of what was happening thousands of miles south.
The Congo.
Exactly, the Belgian Congo, the colony. You
Right.
cannot separate the history of Sabena from the history of colonialism. The airline was arguably created for the colony.
So before Sabena, there was an attempt, right? SNETA.
Right, SNETA, the National Syndicate for the Study of Aerial Transports.
Another kitschy name?
Oh, yeah. SNETA was the beta test. They spent a few years, crashing planes and figuring out if this whole flying thing was commercially viable.
And when they folded?
When they folded, the Belgian government and some private investors, specifically the Different family, said, okay, we need to make this permanent.
But again, this wasn't just about prestige or having a cool new airline. There was a specific group of people demanding this.
The colonists. There were Belgians living and working in the Congo who felt completely cut off.
Right.
They had briefly had a local air service called LRA, but it went bust. So you had this immense pressure from the colonial elite saying, we need a lifeline. We need to move mail, diamonds, gold, and people faster than a river barge.
So Sabena is born in 1923. They do the obligatory first hop to London, I assume.
Of course. July 1st, 1923, Brussels to London via Ostend. Then they add Rotterdam, Strasbourg, Hamburg.
The usual suspect.
The usual suspects, yeah. But these were sideshows. The mission, with a capital M, the absolute obsession of the company, was to link Brussels to Leopoldville, what is now Kinshasa.
Okay, I want to pause here. Because today, Brussels to Kinshasa is what? 8 hours? Maybe 9?
About 8 hours on an Airbus A330. You watch 2 movies, eat a mediocre meal, and you're there.
Right. In 1925, when they decided to try this for the first time,
Yeah.
it wasn't 8 hours.
No, it was 51 days.
51 days.
Yes.
Sorry, what? If I tell my boss, hey, I'm going on a business trip, I'll see you in 2 months, I'm getting fired. How is 51 days a success?
Well, you have to look at the alternative. The alternative was a sea voyage that took weeks, followed by a river journey that took more weeks.
Okay, fair enough.
But the 51 days wasn't the flight time, it was the adventure time. This was Edmund Thiefery, a World War I ace, along with a pilot named Leopold Roger and a mechanic, Joseph de Bricker. They took off in a Handley Page W-8.
A biplane.
A biplane made of wood and fabric, and they weren't just flying, they were battling the planet. They had mechanical failures constantly. They had to wait for parts to be shipped by train or by boat to wherever they were stuck. They got bogged down in mud. They navigated by looking at rivers and hoping the map was right.
It sounds less like an airline route and more like the Lewis and Clark expedition.
That's a great analogy. That's exactly what it was. So when they finally landed in Leopoldville, they were national heroes. But to your point, no, you couldn't run a scheduled service taking 51 days.
So it's a proof of concept.
It proved it was physically possible.
So how do you turn that stunt into a business?
You build. And this is the part of the story that often gets glazed over. The African imperative. Between 1923 and 1926, Sabena oversaw a massive construction program in the Congo. They cleared jungle to build aerodromes.
And when you say they cleared jungle, I'm picturing something pretty grim.
I mean, you have to assume they used forced labor, or at least very low-paid colonial labor, to hack runways out of the dense forest. This was brutal, dangerous work. They built a network connecting Boma, Leopoldville, and Elizabethville. That's a 2,288-kilometer route over territory that, if you crash, you are likely never coming out of.
So for a while, Sabena is essentially two different airlines.
Precisely. You have the European division flying dignitaries to London for tea. Very civilized. And then you have the African division, where planes were shipped in crates by sea, assembled at the docks in Boma, and then flown over the jungle.
And the two networks didn't even connect.
They didn't touch for years. It's like having a subway system in New York and a bus system in Hong Kong and calling it the same transit authority.
That is wild.
Until 1935. That's the golden spike moment. The technology finally caught up. They introduced the Fokker F7.
The trimotor.
The famous trimotor.
Yeah.
It could fly relatively long distances reliably, so they launched the first regular scheduled passenger service between Brussels and the Congo.
And what was the travel time now? We're down from 51 days?
5.5 days.
Okay, that's good.
It's a quantum leap. I mean, it's a game changer. And then just a year later, in 1936, they get the Savoia Marchetti SM.73.
Italian planes.
Yeah, fast Italian planes. Basically converted bombers, and they cut the trip down to 4 days.
4 days. I'm just trying to imagine the passenger experience. You're in a noisy, unpressurized metal tube for 4 days.
It was an endurance sport. It really was. You flew during the day. You landed at these colonial outposts at night to sleep in hotels, often Sabena-owned hotels, by the way.
Of course. Vertical integration.
Exactly. You'd shower, have a gin and tonic, sleep under a mosquito net, and then get back in the plane at dawn. It was exclusive, it was expensive, and it was exhausting.
But it worked. They were the umbilical cord of the empire.
They were. By the late 1930s, Sabena was one of the most important airlines in the world purely because of its route length. But then, obviously, 1940 rolls around.
And the Nazis invade Belgium.
Game over for the European network. And this is key, the African network kept running.
Oh, really?
Yes, the planes in the Congo were used by the Allies. They kept the supply lines open. So while the company in Brussels was dormant under occupation, the heart of the airline was still beating in the tropics.
So the war ends, 1945. Belgium is liberated, and aviation has changed completely.
Completely. The war accelerated aviation technology by 2 decades. Suddenly, you have concrete runways everywhere, you have radar, and most importantly, you have surplus American aircraft.
The Douglas DC-4s and DC-3s.
Thousands of them. Cheap, reliable, and available.
And Sabena grabs them.
They rebrand. The name becomes Sabena Belgian World Airlines. They want everyone to know they are back and they are thinking big. And in June 1946, they launched their first route to New York City.
Using the DC-4.
Yep.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the DC-4 is unpressurized.
It is, very much so.
So they are flying across the North Atlantic.
For roughly 18 to 20 hours with a stop in Gander or Shannon.
In an unpressurized tube.
Which means they can't fly over the weather. If there's a storm at 10,000 feet, you are in the storm. Very. And if it's freezing outside, it's cold inside, it was loud. Those piston engines are deafening compared to modern jets. But for the first time, you could buy a ticket in Brussels and wake up in New York the next day.
It's the start of modern globalization, really. But I want to talk about the dangers here, because looking at the timeline, the 1950s for Sabena wasn't just about commercial growth. It was about dodging bullets, literally.
But the Cold War. Yeah. You have to remember, geographically, flying from Western Europe to the Balkans or the Middle East meant skirting the Iron Curtain.
Tell me about the 1954 incident, because this reads like something out of a Tom Clancy novel.
It's incredible. June 3rd, 1954. A Sabena DC-3 is flying a cargo run from the UK to Yugoslavia.
Okay.
And it's carrying breeding pigs, of all things.
Pigs?
Pigs. High-value livestock. They're flying near the Yugoslav-Austrian border. Now, navigation back then wasn't GPS perfect. Maybe they drifted, maybe they didn't. But a Soviet MiG-15 fighter jet intercepts them.
And usually an intercept means tip your wings, follow me to the airport.
Usually. But this pilot wasn't in the mood for chatting. The MiG opens fire with heavy cannons.
On a cargo plane full of pigs.
Yes, it just shreds the cockpit. The radio operator is killed instantly.
Oh my God.
The captain and the engineer are both wounded. The plane starts diving out of control.
So who is flying the plane?
The co-pilot, a guy named Douglas Wilson, and the wounded captain managed to regain some control. The hydraulics are shot out, the electricals are dead, they are bleeding, and somehow they managed to crash land this thing in a field in Austria.
That is insane.
It was a massive diplomatic incident, but it showed that Sabena was operating on the jagged edge of the world. They weren't just a business, they were a flag carrier in a very, very dangerous time.
And yet, amidst all this danger, they were being incredibly innovative. I was surprised to read about the helicopter network. Because when I think of airlines, I do not think of scheduled helicopter service.
Oh, this is the coolest part of their history, I think. For the 1958 World Expo in Brussels, the one that gave us the Atomium Sabena decided they wanted to be the airline of the future.
Right. A big marketing moment.
Huge. So they bought a fleet of Sikorsky S-58 helicopters.
These are the big ones with the piston engine in the nose, the ones you see in MRH.
Exactly. Loud, rattling beasts. And they set up a scheduled network. You could fly from downtown Brussels to downtown Paris. Not the airports, the city centers.
Wait. So I could walk out of a meeting in Brussels, hop in a helicopter, and land near the Eiffel Tower.
That was the idea, yes. They flew to the heliport at Issy-les-Moulineaux in Paris. They also flew to Antwerp, Rotterdam, Eindhoven, Duisburg. It was the only international helicopter airline network in the world.
Why don't we have this now? That sounds amazing.
It was amazing. It was also phenomenally expensive.
Ah.
Helicopters guzzle fuel. They carry very few people, maybe 12 passengers, and they are maintenance nightmares. Sabena lost money on every single flight.
But as a marketing tool.
It was genius. It made them look like the most advanced airline in Europe. Very Jetsons.
It is very Jetsons, and it set them up perfectly for the actual jet age.
Yeah.
1960, the Boeing 707 arrives.
The plane that changed the world.
It really did.
And Sabena was the first airline in mainland Europe to fly a jet across the Atlantic. They beat Air France. They beat Lufthansa. They were incredibly proud of this.
But the jet age has a dark side. As we know, speed kills.
It does. And Sabena learned this in the most horrific way possible. February 15th, 1961, Sabena Flight 548.
This is the crash that everyone in the figure skating world knows.
Yes. A brand new Boeing 707 on approach to Brussels airport. For some reason, it doesn't go around, it circles, and then suddenly it banks hard, almost 90 degrees, and slams into the ground in a field.
And the passenger list.
The passenger list was just devastating. It was the entire United States figure skating team. The coaches, the skaters, the family members, they were on their way to the World Championships in Prague.
Everyone on board.
Everyone. 73 people on the plane, plus one person on the ground. Everyone died.
Did they ever find out why it happened?
Not definitively. The investigation pointed towards a mechanical failure in the tail stabilizer, but it was never 100% conclusive. But for Sabena, the timing was just awful.
I can imagine.
They had just launched this new era of speed and luxury, and suddenly they're the face of one of the worst aviation disasters of the decade.
And this brings us to the pivotal moment. Because the year 1960 wasn't just about jets. It was about the very reason for Sabena's existence.
Independence.
The Congo becomes independent.
June 30th, 1960. The Belgian colony becomes the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And almost immediately, chaos erupts. The Congo crisis.
And for Sabena, this isn't just a political headline. This is their entire business model collapsing.
It's worse than that. It's an operational nightmare. The Belgian government commandeers the entire long-haul fleet. They stop selling tickets. They turn the airline into a refugee evacuation service.
To get the Belgian nationals out.
Yes. They airlifted something like 35,000 people in a matter of weeks. They were cramming people into the aisles of these new Boeing 707s. It was an incredible logistical feat.
But commercially.
Commercially, it destroyed them.
Because once the airlift is over.
Once it's over, the monopoly is gone. The new Congolese government creates its own airline, Air Congo. Sabena is allowed to help manage it, but they only get a 30% stake. The African imperative that justified the airline size for 40 years just evaporated.
So now you have a large airline with a large fleet based in a small country with no massive lucrative colony to subsidize.
Exactly. This is the beginning of what I would call the identity crisis era. From 1960 to 1990, Sabena is basically a zombie. It's walking, it's flying, but financially, it's dead.
But the government kept it alive.
Oh, constantly. The Belgian state pumped money into it year after year. Because you have to understand, a national airline in the 20th century was like a national flag. You couldn't just let it die. It was a matter of pride.
So they modernized. They bought the Boeing 727s in the 60s.
Beautiful planes. They had that distinctive bare metal rudder that looked so sleek.
And then in the 70s, they bought the jumbo jet, the 747.
Two of them. And in a very Belgian, very cozy way, they named the first one Tante Agathe. Aunt Agathe.
See, that's charming. I'm flying to New York on Antigone.
Yeah.
But does a country the size of Belgium really need a 747?
Probably not. I mean, the 747 is a plane designed for massive volume, high capacity between huge hubs like London and New York. Sabena really struggled to fill it.
So it was a status symbol.
It was pure status. Look, we are a big boy airline. We have a jumbo. But the economics were brutal. The oil crises of the 70s hit them incredibly hard.
So we get to the 1990s. The world is changing again. The European Union is getting serious about competition laws. And state aid becomes a dirty word.
This is the turning point. The Belgian government can no longer just write a check every year to cover the losses. The EU says, no more. Sabena has to stand on its own 2 feet.
And Sabina looks in the mirror and realizes,
We're too small. They were in what consultants call the dead zone. They weren't a global giant like British Airways or Lufthansa, and they weren't a low-cost niche carrier like the emerging Ryanair.
stuck in the middle.
A mid-sized, high-cost legacy carrier with a limited network. They needed a partner. Badly.
It sounds like they were desperate for a date to the prom.
They were swiping right on everyone. In the late 80s, they tried to merge with SAS Scandinavian Airlines. That actually made a lot of sense. 2 similar-sized carriers combining forces.
What happened?
Politics. The deal got blocked by internal squabbling. Then British Airways and KLM bought stakes. That fell apart because of management disputes.
So they're just getting passed around.
They really are. Then Air France bought a stake in 1993.
And that didn't last either.
No. Air France had its own massive problems at the time. So by 1995, Sabena is alone, bleeding cash, and running out of time. And then a knight in shining armor appears from over the mountains.
Swissair.
The Flying Bank.
That's what they call them.
Yes. Swissair was considered the most stable, prestigious, financially sound airline in Europe. They were Swiss. Punctual, rich, efficient.
So when Swissair says, we want to buy 49% of Sabena and take over management, the Belgians must have thought, thank God, we are saved.
They popped the champagne. They thought they had won the lottery. But what they didn't realize was that the Flying Bank was actually undergoing a midlife crisis of its own.
Let's unpack this, because this is where the business strategy gets really interesting and really disastrous. What was Swissair trying to do?
They had a strategy called the Hunter strategy.
That's an ominous name.
Very. So Swissair was not in the EU. Switzerland is neutral, right? So they were worried about being locked out of the newly deregulated European aviation market.
Right. They needed access.
They decided that since they couldn't just merge easily with an EU carrier, they would buy up smaller, struggling airlines to create their own alliance, a sort of empire by proxy.
So they buy Sabena. Who else?
They bought stakes in LTU in Germany, Air Liberté in France, Volar in Italy, LOT in Poland.
Yeah.
A whole collection.
Wait, hold on. They are buying struggling airlines.
Yes, that was the core of the strategy.
That sounds like buying a house with a leaking roof, then buying a car with a blown engine and thinking, now I have a transportation empire.
That is exactly what they did. It's one of the most infamous business strategies in aviation history. They were buying revenue, not profit. They thought they could fix these airlines with Swiss efficiency.
And all they did was weigh themselves down with debt.
Massive debt. And for Sabena, this meant what? It meant losing control.
The Swiss management takes over.
The Swiss management came in and they were let's just say, arrogant. There was a massive culture clash. The Belgians felt like the Swiss looked down on them. But the real nail in the coffin was the fleet renewal.
The 34 Airbuses.
Right. Swissair forced Sabena to place a massive order for 34 brand new Airbus A320 family aircraft.
But Sabena had no money. How could they afford that?
Exactly. It was like forcing a minimum wage worker to lease a fleet of brand new Mercedes. It looked great on the tarmac, but the lease payments absolutely destroyed Sabena's balance sheet. The debt skyrocketed.
So you have a fragile airline loaded with new debt managed by people who are overextending themselves across Europe.
Hmm.
And then 2001.
The perfect storm. Even before September 11th, the global economy was slowing down. The dot-com bubble had burst. Business travel was down.
And then 9/11 happens.
Transatlantic travel basically stops overnight.
For everyone.
It drops to zero and then recovers very, very slowly. Sabena is hemorrhaging money. But here is the twist. The rich uncle, Swissair, they are broke too.
The Hunter strategy failed.
Catastrophically. The flying bank was insolvent. They had burned through all their cash reserves, propping up all these sick airlines they bought.
So both the parent and the child are dying at the same time.
Yes. But there was one last desperate attempt to save Sabena, the hotel agreement.
This is legendary in Belgium, right?
It is. July 17, 2001. The Belgian Prime Minister at the time, Guy Verhofstadt, meets the boss of Swissair, Mario Corti, at a hotel in Brussels.
Why a hotel?
Neutral ground, secrecy, late-night high-stakes negotiations. The pressure was immense. Corti agrees to a rescue plan. Swissair signs a legally binding contract promising to inject 258 million euros into Sabena.
That's the lifeline that keeps the lights on.
It was the only hope. But as the weeks went by, the check didn't arrive.
They ghosted them.
Worse, Swissair filed for bankruptcy protection themselves in early October 2001. They grounded their entire own fleet. The world watched in shock as Swissair planes were stuck on tarmacs because they literally couldn't pay for fuel.
And if Swissair is grounded, Sabena is finished.
Sabena never got the money. On October 3rd, Sabena filed for legal protection, and on November 7, 2001, the inevitable happened.
Indeed.
The end. November 7 was the last day of operations. I want to zoom in on that day because it's just incredibly emotional. You have pilots and cabin crews flying planes knowing they are unemployed the moment they land.
There's a specific flight, right? Very last one, Flight 690.
Yes, an Airbus A340, registration OOSCZ. It was coming from Abidjan and Cotonou.
An African route.
It's fitting, isn't it? It started with Africa, it ended with Africa, it landed in Brussels in the morning, the pilots waved the Belgian flag from the cockpit window, the ground staff were all there just crying. It wasn't just a company closing, it was a divorce, a death in the family.
How many people lost their jobs?
Directly, about 12,000. Indirectly, probably double that. Catering companies, logistics, maintenance firms. It was a social massacre for the region around the airport.
And the anger directed at the Swiss must have been nuclear.
Oh, it was. The Belgian government sued. There were criminal investigations that went on for years. And this is where the story gets a little bit noir.
The Bermuda connection.
Yeah. In the aftermath, investigators started looking at the books, and years later, reports came out, allegations that during the 1990s, certain sums of money were being funneled to a Sabena affiliate in Bermuda.
A tax haven.
The classic tax haven. The allegation was that these were illicit payments to board members.
That's kickbacks.
The theory, and I have to stress, this is a contested theory, is that some people at the top were being paid off to look the other way while the airline was being exploited or stripped of its assets.
Corporate looting.
Exactly. Whether it's true or just a story of gross incompetence, the result was the same. The airline was hollowed out. It didn't just die of natural causes, it was arguably pushed.
It's a bitter, bitter ending. But before we wrap up the history, I feel like we need to address something we touched on earlier but didn't fully explore, the Hotel Rwanda connection. Because Sabena wasn't just planes.
No. And this brings us back to that infrastructure point. Sabena built hotels in the Congo and Rwanda to house their crew and passengers. One of them was the famous Hotel de Mille Collines in Kigali.
The hotel from the movie.
Yes. The main character in that story, Paul Rusesabagina, was a Sabena employee. He was a manager for the Sabena hotel chain.
I never made that connection. That's incredible.
In 1994, during the Rwandan genocide, the fact that this hotel was Belgian-owned, Sabena-owned, gave it a tiny, tiny sliver of diplomatic protection. Rusesabagina used that and his position to shelter over 1,200 people.
That is profound.
It is. It just shows how deeply embedded Sabena was in the fabric of the region. For better or for worse, they were part of the landscape. When Sabena disappeared, it wasn't just a flight schedule changing. It was a piece of the post-colonial infrastructure vanishing overnight.
So Sabena's gone. But is it? Because if I go to Brussels Airport today, I see a lot of blue and red Brussels Airlines planes.
The Phoenix. When Sabena collapsed, the administrators managed to carve out one healthy subsidiary called Delta Air Transport, or DAT.
Which was their regional flyer.
Right. They flew smaller planes around Europe, they saved it from the wreckage, they rebranded it as SN Brussels Airlines, and they kept the SN flight code.
Ah, so that's why my flight number is still SN when I fly with them.
It's the ghost of Sabena. Eventually, they merged with another carrier, Virgin Express, and became Brussels Airlines.
And now they're owned by Lufthansa.
Now they're owned by Lufthansa. Ironically, the German giant one in the end. But the DNA is Sabena. A lot of the pilots, the culture, and especially the African-focused Brussels Airlines is still the #1 carrier between Europe and Africa. That legacy survived the bankruptcy.
So let's try to summarize this epic. We have a company that started with biplanes made of wood and ended with Airbuses grounded on the tarmac. What is the takeaway for you, for the listener?
I think there are 3 big lessons here. First, the incredible bravery of those early years. We shouldn't forget that 51-day flight. That was human spirit at its absolute peak.
Agreed. Pure adventure.
Second, the danger of tying a business model to a political reality. Sabena was built for the colony. When the colony went away, Sabena never really found a new reason to exist. It spent 40 years having an identity crisis.
It was a solution looking for a problem.
Perfectly put. And third, the fatal embrace. Be so careful who you merge with. The Swissair deal is a textbook case study in how not to do M&A. It was driven by ego and fear, not by sound economics. They tried to buy their way out of a strategic problem, and they dragged Sabena down with them.
It really is a tragedy. It's got everything. Adventure, politics, innovation, betrayal.
And pigs. Don't forget the pigs in the DC-3.
And the pigs. It's a powerful reminder that aviation, beneath all the glamour, is a brutal, capital-intensive business where even national icons are never truly safe. Well, this has been a fascinating journey. From the jungles of the Congo to the boardrooms of Zurich. Thank you for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It's an incredible story.
And to our listeners, next time you see an SN on a flight board, you'll know the long, complicated history behind those 2 letters. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Keep looking up, and we'll see you on the next one.